thought the worst day of my life was burying my husband Robert 2 years ago at Riverside Memorial Cemetery. I was wrong. The absolute worst day was pulling into the driveway of our Malibu beach house last Tuesday morning, expecting peaceful solitude, and finding my daughter-in-law, Brenda, blocking my front door like some deranged security guard. She was screaming into her phone while her 3 wild children destroyed my carefully tended garden beds. When she saw me stepping out of my Honda Civic, her face twisted with pure disgust. "Why did that old leech show up here? No room for you," she shrieked, waving dismissively. I smiled calmly and said, "It's okay, dear." But inside my mind was already calculating exactly how I would make her regret those words for the rest of her miserable life. The morning sun cast long shadows across the coastal highway as I drove away from my own property, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. 37 years Robert and I had saved every penny to buy that 3-bedroom oceanfront sanctuary. We'd painted every room ourselves, planted the bougainvillea that now cascaded over the front porch, and dreamed of spending our golden years watching dolphins play in the surf. Now I was checking into the Sunset Harbor Motel, 6 miles down Pacific Coast Highway, surrounded by the smell of stale cigarettes and industrial carpet cleaner. My fingers shook as I dialed Danny's number. My only son answered on the 4th ring, his voice cold and distant, in a way that made my chest tighten with dread. "Mom, Brenda already called me. She explained everything." His words hit like physical blows. "She said you showed up completely disoriented, asking where Dad was and claiming you didn't remember giving them permission to stay at the house." "Permission, Danny? I never gave anyone permission to—" "Mom, stop. Just stop." The exhaustion in his voice was palpable. "Brenda showed me the text messages you sent last week. You told her the whole family could use the beach house while you visited Aunt Patricia in Phoenix. Don't you remember?" My mind reeled. Aunt Patricia had been dead for 15 years. I hadn't sent any text messages to Brenda about the house. But as I tried to explain this to Danny, his responses became increasingly frustrated and patronizing. "Look, I've been worried about you for months. Remember Thanksgiving when you forgot we'd moved the dinner to Thursday or Christmas, when you wrapped the same present for me 3 times? Brenda's been documenting these episodes because she cares about you." The ground beneath my world shifted. I remembered Thanksgiving perfectly. Brenda had told me dinner was Wednesday, then acted surprised when I showed up a day early. At Christmas, I'd wrapped 1 gift for Danny, 1 for his wife Sarah, and 1 for their daughter Emma. Brenda had somehow convinced him these were all identical presents for him. "Danny, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Mom Brenda found some excellent assisted living facilities in Santa Barbara. Clean, safe places where trained professionals can help you. We can't keep worrying about you living alone when your memory is getting so unreliable." After he hung up, I sat on the motel bed staring at water stains on the ceiling. 3 months ago, Robert's life insurance had finally paid out. $500,000 that was supposed to secure my future. Brenda knew about that money. She'd been at the lawyer's office when the check arrived, had seen me deposit it into my savings account. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my text messages. Nothing to Brenda about the house, nothing about Aunt Patricia. But somehow she had evidence that convinced my son his mother was losing her mind. That evening, I drove back toward the beach house, parking across the street behind a cluster of palm trees. Through the large front windows, I could see Brenda lounging on my antique sofa, designer handbags scattered across my coffee table. Her children were jumping on my furniture while a man I'd never seen before rummaged through my kitchen cabinets. Expensive jewelry glittered on Brenda's wrists and neck. Strange, considering she'd been crying poverty for months, asking Danny for grocery money and claiming they couldn't afford their apartment rent. As I watched, Brenda stepped onto the deck with her phone pressed to her ear. Even from across the street, I could hear her laughter carried on the ocean breeze. "You should have seen her face, Jessica. Like a kicked puppy. The stupid old bat actually believed I was doing her a favor by taking over this dump." Her voice grew louder, more animated. "Danny is completely convinced she's losing it. I've been working on this for 8 months, recording conversations and editing them to make her sound confused. Yesterday, I played him a voice message where she supposedly asked me to water her plants, but I cut out the part where she said she'd be away visiting her friend in San Diego. And my blood turned to ice water in my veins. The best part: she has no idea how easy it was to convince everyone she's got dementia. A few strategically placed comments about her forgetfulness at family gatherings, some crocodile tears about how worried I am about her safety, and boom, even her own son thinks she's incompetent. Brenda paused, listening to whoever was on the other end of the call. Oh, the money Danny already gave me access to her bank account so I can help manage her finances. The old fool signed a power of attorney last month, thinking she was helping us with our rent payments. She has no idea I've already transferred $50,000 to our credit cards. The world tilted sideways. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, fighting waves of nausea and rage. This wasn't just casual cruelty. This was a carefully orchestrated campaign designed to steal my life, my home, and my independence. Brenda had been building this narrative for months, positioning herself as the concerned family member worried about poor, confused Silvia. Next week, we're having her declared mentally incompetent. I found this doctor who specializes in fast-track competency evaluations. Costs $5,000, but it's worth it to get legal control of all her assets. Then we can sell this place and pay off our debts. The old leech will be in a nursing home by Christmas. I'd heard enough. My hands were steady now as I started the engine and drove back to the motel. The scared, confused widow who'd been turned away from her own home that morning was gone. In her place sat a woman who understood exactly what she was dealing with and exactly what needed to be done about it. I wasn't losing my mind. I was about to use it. The next morning, I sat in the office of Marcus Webb, private investigator, watching him review the notes I'd taken from Brenda's phone conversation. Marcus was a retired police detective in his 50s, with graying temples and intelligent brown eyes that missed nothing. His office walls were covered with certificates and commendations from his 25 years with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Mrs. Anderson, what you're describing is elder financial abuse, and it's a felony in California. Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, his expression serious. If your daughter-in-law has been systematically manipulating your family while stealing your money, we need to document everything before she can do more damage. I pulled out my checkbook. Whatever this costs, Mr. Webb, I need to know exactly what Brenda has been doing and how far this conspiracy extends. My standard rate is $200 per day plus expenses. Given the financial crimes involved, I recommend we also consult with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division if we find evidence of wire fraud or identity theft. Within 48 hours, Marcus had uncovered a staggering web of deception. Brenda and her unemployed brother, Kyle, owed $87,000 in credit card debt across 14 different accounts. They were 3 months behind on rent for their apartment in Van Nuys and facing eviction. Kyle had borrowed $30,000 from a loan shark named Vincent Torino, who was known for violent collection methods. But the financial pressure was only the beginning of the story. Marcus showed me surveillance photographs of Brenda at my mailbox, intercepting bank statements and investment reports. She's been monitoring your mail for at least 6 months, he explained, spreading the photos across his desk. Look at these timestamps. She hits your mailbox every Tuesday and Friday, exactly when financial institutions typically send statements. The photographs showed Brenda carefully steaming open envelopes, photographing their contents with her phone, then resealing them before placing them back in my mailbox. In several images, she could be seen sitting in her car practicing signatures on a notepad. This gets worse. Marcus continued pulling up bank security footage on his laptop. This is from First National Bank on Wilshire Boulevard, taken last Thursday at 2:15 in the afternoon. The grainy video showed Brenda standing at the customer service counter, sliding documents across to a young bank teller. She was dressed conservatively, wearing glasses I'd never seen her use, and speaking in what appeared to be an elderly woman's slower cadence. "She's impersonating you, Mrs. Anderson. The teller later told investigators that a confused older woman came in claiming to be Silvia Anderson, saying she needed to add her daughter-in-law to her accounts because her memory wasn't reliable anymore. My stomach dropped as I watched Brenda forge my signature on form after form, her hand moving with practiced confidence. The teller, clearly trying to be helpful to what appeared to be a struggling elderly customer, processed each document without requesting additional identification. "How much?" I whispered. Marcus's expression was grim. "She's gained access to 3 of your accounts totaling $412,000. She started with small transfers to test whether anyone would notice. $50 here, $100 there. When no red flags appeared, she escalated to larger amounts." He showed me bank records documenting a systematic pattern of theft. $5,000 transferred to pay Kyle's gambling debts, $8,000 to cover their apartment's back rent, $15,000 charged to my credit card for furniture and electronics. They'd moved into the beach house. Another $22,000 had simply vanished into cash withdrawals from ATMs across Los Angeles County. "There's more." Marcus pulled up another set of documents. "She's been selling your belongings online. Look at this." My laptop screen filled with eBay listings featuring my grandmother's china cabinet, Robert's vintage fishing equipment, and the antique jewelry I kept in my bedroom safe. The listings were posted under the username Brenda Beach House, with the description, "Estate sale items from deceased relative." "She has keys to your house." Danny gave them to her last month when I supposedly asked them to check on the property while I was visiting family in Arizona. Another conversation I never had. My voice was bitter. "She's been systematically looting my home for weeks." Marcus opened a thick folder containing printed emails, text message screenshots, and financial records. "Mrs. Anderson, I need to show you something that's going to be very difficult to hear." The documents revealed that Brenda had been planning this scheme for over a year. Emails to her brother discussed the old lady's money and strategies for getting Danny on our side. Text messages to friends joked about playing the caring daughter-in-law role until they could cash in on Robert's death. Most devastating were the voice recordings. Using a smartphone app, Brenda had been recording our family interactions for months, then editing them to remove context and make me sound confused or irrational. A recording of me asking for Robert during a particularly difficult grief episode had been edited to remove my immediate clarification that I was talking about a Robert De Niro movie we used to watch together. A conversation about visiting my friend Patricia had been chopped up to make it sound like I thought my dead aunt was still alive. "She's been building a legal case to have you declared incompetent," Marcus explained. "These recordings, combined with the false medical records they're preparing, would be enough to convince a judge that you need a conservator." "False medical records?" Marcus nodded gravely. "That's where this gets really dangerous. Brenda has been working with a man calling himself Dr. Harrison Polk, claims to be a geriatric psychiatrist specializing in dementia evaluations. Problem is, Harrison Polk lost his medical license in Nevada 3 years ago for insurance fraud. His real name is Harry Paulson, and he's been running competency scams across multiple states." The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. Brenda hadn't just stumbled into financial elder abuse. She was part of an organized operation that targeted wealthy seniors, systematically destroying their credibility while draining their assets. "How many others?" I asked. "We're still investigating, but preliminary evidence suggests at least 12 families in Southern California have been victimized by this network in the past 2 years. The average loss per victim is over $300,000. That evening, I sat in my motel room reading through Marcus's evidence files. The woman who had considered herself a helpless widow just days ago was gone, replaced by someone who understood the scope of the battle ahead. Brenda had underestimated me in the most dangerous way possible. She assumed that because I was 68 years old and recently widowed, I would be easy prey. She was about to learn how wrong she was. I picked up my phone and called Margaret Sullivan, my personal banker at First National for the past 20 years. Margaret had processed Robert's life insurance payout, and had helped me manage our finances through his illness. Silvia, I'm so glad you called. I was getting worried about some unusual account activity. Margaret, I need to see you first thing tomorrow morning, and I need you to freeze every account immediately. I'll explain everything when I see you. As I hung up, I realized something had fundamentally changed inside me. The grief and confusion of the past few days had crystallized into something much more dangerous, absolute clarity about what needed to be done. Brenda wanted to play games with a confused old woman. Instead, she was going to face a very angry, very determined, and surprisingly resourceful opponent. The real fight was just beginning. Margaret's office at First National Bank overlooked the Santa Monica Pier, where families were enjoying the afternoon sunshine, completely unaware that serious crimes were being planned just a few blocks away. Margaret, a sharp woman in her 40s, with auburn hair and fierce loyalty to her longtime clients, spread Brenda's forged documents across her mahogany desk like evidence at a crime scene. Silvia, I should have called you immediately when these transactions started appearing. Margaret's voice carried genuine regret. The signatures looked convincing, and the story about helping your memory problems seemed plausible given your recent loss. I failed you as your banker and your friend. I studied the forged signatures, marveling at their accuracy. Don't blame yourself, Margaret. This woman has been planning this for over a year. She practiced my handwriting until she could fool professionals. Margaret pulled up account records on her computer screen. The damage is extensive but not irreversible. She's stolen $93,000 across your checking savings and money market accounts. However, because I flagged the last 2 large transfers as suspicious, we can reverse those transactions and freeze her access. What about the reverse mortgage application? That's the most serious concern. Margaret's expression darkened. If she'd succeeded in fraudulently obtaining a reverse mortgage on your beach house, you could have lost the property entirely. The application was for $400,000, which would have created a lien against your home that would be nearly impossible to challenge after the fact. I felt a chill imagining how close I'd come to losing everything. Show me exactly what she submitted. The reverse mortgage application was a masterpiece of deception. Brenda had submitted medical records claiming I suffered from moderate dementia and required full-time care. A letter purportedly from Dr. Harrison Polk stated that I was no longer capable of making financial decisions and that my daughter-in-law had been appointed as my caregiver. The mortgage company would have conducted their own medical evaluation, Margaret explained, but with Dr. Polk's letter as supporting evidence, they might have rushed the approval process. I stared at the fraudulent medical records, recognizing how thoroughly Brenda had planned to destroy my independence. According to these documents, I was practically a vegetable, unable to remember my own address or recognize family members. The real Silvia Anderson was described as a danger to herself who required immediate placement in a memory care facility. Margaret, I need you to help me set a trap. Over the next hour, we developed a strategy that would give Brenda enough rope to hang herself legally. Margaret would contact the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit to report the identity theft and wire fraud. Meanwhile, I would work with Marcus to gather additional evidence while pretending to be increasingly confused and helpless. The key is letting her think she's winning, Margaret explained as we finalized our plan. We need her to commit to the competency evaluation with Dr. Polk. Once she attempts to have you declared mentally incompetent based on fraudulent medical evidence, we'll have multiple felony charges that will guarantee serious prison time. That afternoon, Marcus introduced me to Agent Sarah Chen with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Agent Chen was a specialist in elder fraud cases, and her office walls were covered with photographs of elderly victims who'd been targeted by sophisticated scam operations. Mrs. Anderson, your case represents one of the most comprehensive elder abuse schemes we've investigated, Agent Chen explained as she reviewed Marcus's evidence. The combination of identity theft wire fraud, medical fraud, and conspiracy to commit competency fraud gives us multiple federal charges we can pursue. She showed me a map of California with red pins marking locations where similar crimes had been committed. This network has been operating for at least 3 years. They target recently widowed women with substantial assets, then use family members to gain access to homes and financial accounts. Your daughter-in-law represents the inside person who legitimizes their access to victims. How many families have they destroyed? Based on our preliminary investigation, at least 18 families across 4 states have lost their homes and life savings to this operation. The total damages exceed $2.4 million. Agent Chen explained that fake Dr. Harrison Polk had been using his fraudulent credentials to help family members gain conservatorship over elderly relatives in Nevada, Arizona, California, and Oregon. Once legal control was established, the victims were placed in substandard care facilities, while their assets were liquidated. The beautiful thing about your situation, Mrs. Anderson, is that you discovered the scheme before the competency hearing. This gives us an opportunity to catch them in the act of committing multiple federal crimes simultaneously. That evening, Marcus and I returned to the beach house to install surveillance equipment. We waited until Brenda and her family left for dinner, then spent 2 hours placing tiny cameras and recording devices throughout the property. The technology was remarkably advanced, nearly invisible cameras that could record high-definition video and audio for up to 72 hours before needing battery replacement. As we worked, I discovered the extent of damage Brenda's family had caused to my beloved home. Cigarette burns scarred my antique dining table. Wine stains covered the Persian rug Robert and I had bought during our anniversary trip to Istanbul. My grandmother's china had been carelessly stacked in boxes marked for donation to Goodwill. This isn't just theft, I told Marcus as we surveyed the destruction. This is deliberate cruelty. She's not just stealing my money, she's destroying every memory I have of my life with Robert. Marcus nodded grimly. It's psychological warfare designed to break your spirit completely. She wants you to feel helpless and defeated when the competency evaluation happens. Broken people don't fight back effectively. In my bedroom, we discovered that Brenda had been sleeping in my bed, wearing my clothes, and using my personal belongings. She'd even replaced my family photographs with pictures of her own children, as if she was already erasing my existence from my own home. But the most chilling discovery was in Robert's study. Brenda had been using his desk to plan the competency scam, and she'd left behind detailed notes outlining her strategy. The handwritten pages described exactly how she would present me as a confused, dangerous woman who needed immediate institutionalization. Phase 1. Establish pattern of confusion and memory loss. I read aloud from her notes. Phase 2. Create financial crisis requiring family intervention. Phase 3. Medical evaluation confirms incompetence. Phase 4. Emergency conservatorship and immediate nursing home placement. Phase 5. Liquidate all assets and relocate to avoid scrutiny. Marcus photographed every page while I fought back tears of rage and betrayal. This wasn't impulsive greed. Brenda had methodically planned to erase my identity, steal my life savings, and abandon me in an institution where no one would listen if I tried to expose what she'd done. As we prepared to leave, I heard cars pulling into the driveway. We quickly gathered our equipment and slipped out through the back door, making it to Marcus's car, just as Brenda's family returned from their evening out. From across the street, I watched Brenda unlock my front door and step inside my house, as if she owned it. Her children ran wild through rooms filled with my lifetime of memories, while her brother Kyle set up what looked like drug paraphernalia on my kitchen counter. Tomorrow we start recording everything, Marcus said as we drove away. Within a week, we'll have enough evidence to destroy this entire operation. I stared back at my house, now occupied by criminals who were systematically dismantling everything I held dear. But instead of despair, I felt something much more dangerous building inside me, the cold, calculating fury of a woman who had absolutely nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Brenda thought she was dealing with a confused old lady who would quietly disappear into whatever nursing home she selected. She had no idea she'd just declared war on someone who was about to fight back with the full force of federal law enforcement, modern surveillance technology, and 68 years of accumulated wisdom about how the real world actually works. The next phase of my plan would require the performance of a lifetime. I needed to convince Brenda that her psychological warfare was succeeding while secretly documenting every crime she committed. It was time to show this woman what real strategic thinking looked like. The following Tuesday morning, I drove to the beach house wearing clothes I'd deliberately rumpled and stained my hair, uncombed my makeup smeared to suggest I'd been crying. The hidden cameras Marcus and I installed would capture everything, but I needed Brenda to believe she was witnessing my genuine breakdown. I parked crookedly in my own driveway and stumbled to the front door, fumbling with keys that I pretended wouldn't work properly. Through the windows, I could see Brenda scrambling to hide drug paraphernalia, while her brother Kyle ducked into the back bedroom. When Brenda opened the door, her expression immediately shifted to false concern, mixed with barely concealed satisfaction. Silvia. What are you doing here? I told you yesterday that Danny wants you to stay at the motel until we can find you proper care. I let my voice quaver with confusion and desperation. I'm looking for Robert. He was supposed to meet me here for our anniversary dinner. We always have dinner on the deck watching the sunset. I pushed past her into my own living room, scanning the destroyed space with apparent bewilderment. Where is he? Where's my husband? Brenda's eyes lit up with predatory glee. She immediately pulled out her phone and started recording, capturing what appeared to be a confused elderly woman having a psychotic episode in her own home. Silvia Honey Robert passed away 2 years ago. Remember, we talked about this yesterday. You're having another one of your episodes. Her voice was dripping with patronizing sympathy for the benefit of the recording. This is exactly why Danny is worried about you living alone. I wandered through my house, touching furniture and photographs while maintaining my performance of confused grief. But he was just here. We were planning to replant the rose garden. I picked up one of the few remaining family photos, holding it with shaking hands. This isn't right. Someone moved all our things. Oh, sweetie, Brenda cooed, still recording. You gave us permission to redecorate while you're staying at the care facility. Don't you remember signing the papers? I allowed my face to crumple with the perfect combination of confusion and fear that would look devastating on video. But while I appeared to be falling apart, my mind was cataloging every detail of Brenda's performance. She was coaching me toward specific responses, trying to get me to say things that would support her narrative of advancing dementia. I want to go home. I whispered, letting real tears fall. The tears weren't for show. They were tears of rage at what this woman had done to my family, but they served perfectly for my performance. This is your home, Silvia, but you can't stay here alone anymore. It's not safe. Brenda guided me toward the door with fake gentleness. Let me call Danny to come pick you up. As she made the call, I pretended to wander aimlessly around the room, but I was actually positioning myself to capture her side of the conversation on my hidden recording device. Danny, she's here again looking for Robert. It's getting worse. Brenda's voice carried just the right note of overwhelmed concern. She doesn't recognize that we've redecorated, and she's talking about anniversary dinners with someone who's been dead for 2 years. I really think we need to move faster on the competency evaluation. While she was distracted by the phone call, I slipped a folded piece of paper under the sofa cushion. The paper looked like a confused grocery list with seemingly random words and numbers. Milk 47391, bread, remember password eggs, 82756, Robert's medicine. To anyone finding it, this would appear to be the meaningless rambling of a confused mind. In reality, the numbers were account codes for assets I'd been secretly moving to protected accounts that Brenda couldn't access. When Danny arrived 20 minutes later, I was sitting on the front steps, holding my purse and looking lost. My performance had to convince my own son that his mother was genuinely losing her grip on reality. Mom, what were you thinking driving here alone? Danny's voice mixed frustration with genuine worry. Brenda said you were looking for Dad again. I let my voice sound small and uncertain. I thought he was waiting for me. We always have Tuesday dinners together. I looked up at Danny with the confused expression I'd practiced in the mirror. "You look so much like your father when he was younger." Danny and Brenda exchanged a meaningful glance that broke my heart. My own son was convinced his mother had lost her mind, and Brenda was expertly reinforcing his fears. "Dr. Polk wants to see you tomorrow, Mom. He's a specialist who helps people with memory problems. Brenda arranged the appointment because she's worried about you." I nodded docilely, playing the role of a woman too confused to understand what was really happening to her. "Will you come with me? I don't like going to doctors alone." "Of course, Mom. Brenda will drive you there and I'll meet you afterward." As Danny drove me back to the motel, I caught his eyes in the rearview mirror studying me with a mixture of love and pity that made me want to scream. My own child believed his mother was sliding into dementia, and there was nothing I could say to convince him otherwise without destroying the evidence we needed to stop Brenda's crimes. That evening, I reviewed the recordings Marcus had collected from the hidden cameras. Brenda's true personality emerged the moment she thought I was gone. The grieving, concerned daughter-in-law disappeared, replaced by a calculating criminal who laughed about my performance. "Did you see her looking for her dead husband?" Brenda was telling Kyle while they divided up my jewelry. "The old bat is completely losing it. Dr. Polk said the more confused she appears during the evaluation, the easier it will be to get the conservatorship approved." Kyle, a thin man in his 30s with nervous energy and poor dental work, was sorting my belongings into boxes marked "Sell, Quizza, Keep, Sobriquet, and Trash." My grandmother's wedding ring was in the sell pile, along with Robert's military medals and my mother's pearl necklace. "What about her son?" Kyle asked. "Think he's going to cause problems once she's declared incompetent?" Brenda laughed, a sound completely devoid of warmth or humanity. "Danny? He'll be relieved. He's been worried about managing her care while trying to raise his own family. Once she's safely locked away in some nursing home, he'll thank us for handling everything." The recording captured Brenda admitting to crimes I hadn't even suspected. She'd been intercepting calls from my doctor's office telling them I'd moved and didn't need follow-up care. She'd canceled my homeowner's insurance, claiming I'd sold the house. She'd even contacted my investment advisor saying I wanted to liquidate my retirement accounts due to urgent medical expenses. But the most damning evidence was yet to come. Kyle pulled out a laptop and showed Brenda a website displaying nursing homes with poor state inspection ratings and high mortality rates. "I found the perfect place for her," Kyle announced. "Sunset Manor in Riverside. They specialize in severe dementia cases where family members want minimal contact. Once she's there, no one will believe anything she says about us stealing her money." Brenda clapped her hands together like a child receiving a present. "Perfect. The further away, the better. I want her completely isolated so she can't interfere with selling the house." They spent the next hour planning my disappearance from my own life with casual cruelty that took my breath away. Brenda had already contacted real estate agents about listing the beach house. She'd researched the legal requirements for liquidating assets belonging to an incompetent person. She'd even selected which of my possessions she wanted to keep as mementos of her deceased mother-in-law. As I listened to them dividing up my life like vultures picking over a carcass, something fundamental crystallized inside me. This wasn't just about money anymore. Brenda was planning to erase my identity so completely that no one would ever know what she'd done to me. She wanted to steal not just my assets, but my history, my relationships, and my right to exist as an independent human being. The next morning, I prepared for my performance with Dr. Harrison Polk. This would be the most critical acting job of my life. I needed to appear confused enough to satisfy Brenda's expectations while secretly documenting evidence of medical fraud that would send both her and her accomplice to federal prison. I dressed in clothes that were slightly too large applied makeup that made me look older and more fragile, and practiced the trembling voice of a woman whose mind was betraying her. But underneath the costume and the performance, I was razor sharp and absolutely ready for war. Dr. Polk's office was in a strip mall between a payday loan shop and a tax preparation service. The waiting room smelled like disinfectant and desperation, with outdated magazines and uncomfortable plastic chairs that had seen better decades. When Brenda walked me inside, she was playing her role perfectly, the devoted daughter-in-law heartbroken about her mother-in-law's declining mental health. She had another episode yesterday, Brenda told the receptionist in a stage whisper. She was looking for her husband who died 2 years ago. We're really hoping Dr. Polk can help us understand how to best care for her. I sat quietly, hands folded, maintaining the expression of someone only partially aware of her surroundings. But my hidden recording device was capturing every word, and my mind was cataloging details that would help federal investigators shut down this entire operation. Dr. Polk was a small man in his 60s, wearing an expensive suit that didn't quite hide his nervous energy. When he called us into his office, I noticed his medical diploma was positioned to hide the name of the issuing institution, and his credentials were printed on cheap paper that suggested they'd been created recently. Mrs. Anderson, I understand you've been having some memory difficulties. Dr. Polk began, his voice carrying the patronizing tone medical professionals sometimes use with elderly patients they assume are incompetent. I responded with carefully rehearsed confusion, mixing accurate memories with deliberate mistakes that would support Brenda's narrative without making me appear completely non-functional. I remember some things clearly, but other memories seem fuzzy, I said, letting my voice waver slightly. Sometimes I forget what year it is, or I think my husband is still alive. Dr. Polk nodded, making notes that I suspected were being written for an audience rather than legitimate medical documentation. Have you been having trouble managing your finances or making important decisions? This was the critical moment. My answer would be used to justify transferring control of my assets to Brenda. I needed to sound convincing while providing evidence of Dr. Polk's willingness to diagnose dementia without proper examination. Brenda helps me with everything now, I said, looking gratefully toward my daughter-in-law. I get so confused about money and bills. She's been such a blessing taking care of all the complicated financial matters. Brenda squeezed my hand with false affection. It's been challenging, but we're family. I just want what's best for Silvia's health and safety. Dr. Polk conducted what appeared to be a thorough cognitive assessment, but I recognized it as theater designed to create the appearance of legitimate medical evaluation. His questions were leading designed to elicit responses that would support a predetermined diagnosis. After 30 minutes, Dr. Polk announced his conclusion with the confidence of someone who'd made the same diagnosis dozens of times before. Mrs. Anderson, based on my evaluation, you're experiencing moderate cognitive decline, consistent with early-stage dementia. You're no longer capable of making complex financial or legal decisions independently. I strongly recommend that your family pursue conservatorship proceedings to ensure your safety and protection. I let my face crumple with fear and confusion while mentally noting that Dr. Polk had just committed medical fraud on federal recording equipment. What does that mean? Will I still be able to live in my house? Brenda's hand tightened on mine with barely concealed excitement. Don't worry, Silvia. We'll make sure you're taken care of. There are wonderful facilities where trained professionals can help people with your condition. As we left the office, Dr. Polk handed Brenda a typed report declaring me mentally incompetent and recommending immediate conservatorship. The document would be filed with the court within 48 hours, initiating legal proceedings that would strip away my rights and transfer control of my assets to my loving family. Walking to the parking lot, I maintained my performance of confused resignation while internally celebrating the fact that we'd just recorded comprehensive evidence of medical fraud conspiracy and elder abuse that would guarantee serious prison time for everyone involved. Brenda was practically giddy as she helped me into her car. That went perfectly, Silvia. Dr. Polk is going to help us make sure you get the best possible care. I nodded meekly, playing the role of a broken woman who had no idea what was being done to her. But in my purse, a federal recording device had captured every word of their criminal conspiracy, and hidden cameras at the beach house were documenting their ongoing theft of my possessions. The trap was set. All that remained was waiting for them to walk into it. The competency hearing was scheduled for 9 o'clock on a Thursday morning in downtown Los Angeles Superior Court. Brenda had spent the previous week coaching me on how to behave during the proceedings, emphasizing that I should appear confused and defer to her guidance in all matters. "Just remember, Silvia, we're doing this to protect you," she said as she drove me to the courthouse. "The judge needs to see that you're not capable of making decisions for yourself anymore. If you seem too alert or argumentative, it might delay getting you the help you need." I sat quietly in the passenger seat wearing the same rumpled clothing I'd been using for my performances, my expression vacant and compliant. But underneath my confused elderly woman costume, I was wearing a wire provided by the FBI, and Agent Chen was monitoring everything from a surveillance van parked across the street from the courthouse. We met Danny and Dr. Polk in the courthouse lobby. My son looked uncomfortable but resigned, clearly believing he was doing what was best for his declining mother. Dr. Polk carried a briefcase filled with fraudulent medical records and was reviewing his testimony notes with the confidence of someone who'd committed this particular crime many times before. "How are you feeling, Mom?" Danny asked, genuinely concerned about my welfare. I let my voice sound small and uncertain. "I'm a little scared. I don't understand why we're here or what's going to happen to me." Brenda immediately stepped in with fake reassurance. "It's just a formality, sweetie. The judge wants to make sure you have help managing things that are too complicated for you to handle alone." As we walked toward the courtroom, I caught a glimpse of Marcus Webb and Margaret Sullivan, sitting in the hallway pretending to read newspapers while actually documenting everyone who entered the proceedings. They were part of the coordinated operation that would unfold over the next hour. We took our seats in courtroom 312, where Judge Patricia Morrison was reviewing case files. Brenda's attorney, a nervous man named Richard Davis, who specialized in expedited conservatorship proceedings, was shuffling through documents and whispering last-minute instructions to his client. "Your Honor," Attorney Davis began when our case was called, "we're here today regarding the urgent need for conservatorship of Mrs. Silvia Anderson, who's been diagnosed with advancing dementia and is no longer capable of managing her financial affairs or making decisions regarding her personal welfare." Judge Morrison, a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and penetrating eyes, reviewed the submitted medical records with the careful attention of someone who'd seen every form of legal manipulation during her 20 years on the bench. "Dr. Polk, please summarize your evaluation of Mrs. Anderson's mental capacity." Dr. Polk stood and delivered his rehearsed testimony about my supposed cognitive decline, carefully describing symptoms that would justify immediate intervention. His performance was polished and convincing, the result of years spent helping families steal from vulnerable relatives. Based on my examination, Mrs. Anderson exhibits significant memory loss confusion about basic facts and inability to understand financial concepts. She requires immediate supervision and should not be permitted to make independent decisions regarding her assets or living arrangements. Judge Morrison turned her attention to me. "Mrs. Anderson, do you understand why we're here today?" This was the moment of truth. I needed to appear confused enough to satisfy Brenda's expectations while positioning myself for the dramatic reversal that was about to unfold. "I think there's been some confusion, Your Honor," I said, letting my voice waver slightly. "My daughter-in-law has been helping me with complicated things, but I don't understand why we need a judge to be involved." Brenda squeezed my arm, sending signals that I should appear more confused and dependent. Attorney Davis nodded approvingly, clearly believing the proceedings were going exactly as planned. "Your Honor." Davis continued, "As you can see, Mrs. Anderson doesn't understand the seriousness of her condition. Her family is requesting emergency conservatorship to prevent her from making decisions that could endanger her health and financial security." Judge Morrison was about to respond when the courtroom doors opened and Agent Sarah Chen walked in, followed by 2 additional FBI agents and Marcus Webb. The federal agents were carrying boxes of evidence and wearing expressions that suggested this was not going to be the routine conservatorship hearing everyone expected. "Your Honor," Agent Chen announced, "I'm Special Agent Sarah Chen with the FBI Financial Crimes Division. I need to interrupt these proceedings to present evidence of federal crimes currently being committed in this courtroom." The transformation in the room was instantaneous. Brenda's face went white as she realized something had gone terribly wrong. Dr. Polk attempted to stand, but one of the FBI agents gestured for him to remain seated. Attorney Davis looked between his clients and the federal agents with growing alarm. "What is the nature of these alleged crimes, Agent Chen?" Judge Morrison asked her judicial authority, taking precedence over the obvious chaos unfolding in her courtroom. "Identity, theft, wire, fraud, medical fraud, conspiracy to commit elder abuse and perjury, Your Honor. The woman seated at the defendant's table has been systematically stealing from Mrs. Anderson while building a fraudulent case to have her declared mentally incompetent." I felt a surge of satisfaction as Brenda turned to stare at me with dawning horror. The confused, helpless woman she thought she'd been manipulating was gone, replaced by someone whose eyes were sharp-focused and absolutely furious. Agent Chen approached the bench and handed Judge Morrison a thick folder containing evidence that would destroy Brenda's life. "Your Honor, Mrs. Anderson has been working with federal investigators for 2 weeks to document an extensive elder abuse scheme. The medical evaluation presented to this court is fraudulent. Dr. Polk is not a licensed physician, and the conservatorship petition is based on manufactured evidence." Judge Morrison opened the evidence folder and began reviewing recordings, financial documents, and surveillance photographs, while the entire courtroom watched in stunned silence. The only sound was Brenda's increasingly rapid breathing as she realized the scope of evidence assembled against her. "Dr. Polk." Judge Morrison's voice was ice cold. "Are you currently licensed to practice medicine in the state of California?" Dr. Polk's carefully constructed professional demeanor cracked completely. "Your Honor, there seems to be some misunderstanding about my credentials." "That's not an answer to my question. Are you licensed to practice medicine in California, yes or no?" "No, Your Honor, but I have extensive experience in cognitive evaluation." "Agent Chen, please place this man under arrest for practicing medicine without a license and conspiracy to commit fraud." As FBI agents moved to arrest Dr. Polk, Judge Morrison turned her attention to Brenda, whose face had transformed from confusion to panic to desperate calculation as she searched for some way to escape the trap that was closing around her. "Mrs. Anderson, the younger Mrs. Anderson." Judge Morrison's voice carried the weight of absolute judicial authority. "How do you explain surveillance evidence showing you forging Mrs. Silvia Anderson's signature on bank documents and fraudulently accessing her financial accounts?" Brenda stood shakily, her voice high and desperate. "Your Honor, there's been a terrible mistake. I was only trying to help Silvia manage her finances because she asked me to. She's been so confused lately, forgetting conversations and asking me to handle things for her." Agent Chen stepped forward with a laptop computer. "Your Honor, we have video and audio recordings of Mrs. Brenda Anderson admitting to forging signatures, stealing money, and planning to have Mrs. Silvia Anderson committed to a substandard care facility so she could liquidate her assets without interference." The laptop screen filled with crystal-clear footage of Brenda in my kitchen, laughing about her deception while dividing up my possessions. Her own voice filled the courtroom as she described her strategy for manipulating my family and stealing my life savings. "The old bat is completely losing it. Dr. Polk said the more confused she appears during the evaluation, the easier it will be to get the conservatorship approved." Brenda's legs gave out and she collapsed back into her chair as her own words condemned her. Danny was staring at his wife with an expression of absolute horror, finally understanding the scope of her betrayal. "We also have evidence," Agent Chen continued, "that this is part of a multi-state elder abuse operation that has defrauded dozens of families. Mrs. Brenda Anderson has stolen approximately $93,000 from her mother-in-law, while systematically destroying Mrs. Silvia Anderson's credibility within her own family." Judge Morrison closed the evidence folder and looked directly at me. "Mrs. Anderson, the real Mrs. Anderson, are you currently suffering from dementia or any cognitive impairment that would prevent you from managing your own affairs?" I stood and faced the court with the dignity and strength I'd been hiding for weeks. "No, Your Honor, I am not suffering from dementia. I have been working with federal investigators to expose my daughter-in-law's crimes and protect other elderly Americans from similar victimization." The courtroom erupted as the full scope of Brenda's deception became clear. Danny was sobbing, realizing he'd been manipulated into betraying his own mother. Attorney Davis was frantically reviewing his files, understanding that his client had lied to him about every aspect of the case. "Mrs. Brenda Anderson," Judge Morrison announced, "you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, and conspiracy. Your children will be placed in protective custody, pending investigation of their living conditions and exposure to criminal activity." As FBI agents placed handcuffs on Brenda, she turned to me with a look of pure hatred. "You tricked us. You're not really sick at all." I met her gaze with the cold satisfaction of someone who had fought back against evil and won. "No, dear, I'm not sick, but you're about to be very sorry you ever called me an old leech." The federal agents led Brenda and Dr. Polk away in handcuffs while Danny approached me with tears streaming down his face. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I believed her lies. I thought you were really sick and I was trying to protect you." I hugged my son, feeling genuine compassion for how thoroughly Brenda had manipulated his love and concern. "You were trying to be a good son, Danny. She's a professional criminal who fooled all of us for a while." As we left the courthouse, I realized that justice was just beginning. The evidence we'd gathered would help federal investigators identify and prosecute an entire network of criminals who targeted elderly Americans. Brenda's arrest was just the first domino in a much larger investigation that would protect countless families from similar victimization. The woman who had been turned away from her own home just 3 weeks ago was walking out of court as the victor in a battle she'd never expected to fight. But the war was far from over. Within 72 hours of Brenda's arrest, the investigation had expanded beyond anything I could have imagined. Agent Chen called me Thursday evening to explain that our evidence had helped the FBI uncover what they now called Operation Golden Years, a sophisticated criminal network that had been targeting wealthy seniors across 4 Western states for over 3 years. "Mrs. Anderson, your courage in fighting back has opened up the biggest elder fraud case in the Bureau's history," Agent Chen explained as we sat in the conference room at the FBI's Los Angeles field office. "The recordings you helped us gather have led to search warrants in Nevada, Arizona, Oregon, and California." She spread photographs across the conference table showing dozens of elderly victims who had suffered similar attacks on their independence and assets. Mary Patterson, 74, lost her ranch in Colorado after her son-in-law convinced a court she had Alzheimer's. William Chen, 69, was declared incompetent and placed in a nursing home, while his daughter liquidated his retirement savings. Elizabeth Murphy, 72, died in a substandard care facility, while her family fought over the proceeds from selling her home. "How many people?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. 47 confirmed victims across the 4-state area. Total losses exceed $3.8 million, but the financial crimes are just the beginning of the story. Agent Chen pulled up an organizational chart on her laptop, showing the connections between various criminals in the network. Fake Dr. Harrison Polk had been working with corrupt family members, dishonest attorneys, and compromised nursing home administrators to create a pipeline for stealing from elderly Americans. Your daughter-in-law was what we call a family infiltrator. She married your son specifically to gain access to your assets. Kyle, her brother, was responsible for identifying wealthy targets through public records and social media surveillance. Dr. Polk provided fraudulent medical evaluations that justified conservatorship proceedings. The scope of their organization was staggering. They had accomplices in banks who overlooked suspicious signature discrepancies, nursing home administrators who accepted patients without proper medical documentation, and even funeral home directors who helped families dispose of victims who died under questionable circumstances. What about the loan shark Vincent Torino that Kyle owed money to? Agent Chen's expression darkened. That's where this case gets particularly dangerous. Torino wasn't just a loan shark. He was the financial backer for the entire operation. He provided startup money for families to establish themselves in communities where they could identify and target victims. When they successfully completed a fraud, he took a percentage of the stolen assets. She showed me surveillance photographs of Torino meeting with other families who had been recruited to target elderly relatives. The operation was systematic, professional, and absolutely ruthless in its targeting of the most vulnerable members of society. We've arrested 12 people so far, with more arrests expected over the next week. Your evidence didn't just stop one crime, Mrs. Anderson. It's dismantled an entire criminal enterprise. Friday morning brought news that filled me with grim satisfaction. Danny called to tell me that Child Protective Services had removed Brenda's 3 children from the drug-infested environment she'd created at my beach house. The children were placed with his sister, Sarah, who lived in Sacramento and had no idea about Brenda's criminal activities. The house is a disaster, Mom. Danny reported, his voice heavy with guilt and exhaustion. They were cooking methamphetamine in your kitchen. Kyle had set up a drug distribution center in Dad's study. There are needle tracks in your hardwood floors and chemical burns on your countertops. The property damage was extensive but repairable. The emotional damage to my family would take much longer to heal. Danny, I need you to understand something important. This isn't your fault. Brenda is a professional criminal who spent months manipulating you into believing I was sick. You were trying to protect your mother based on lies she fed you systematically. But my son was struggling with guilt that would probably haunt him for years. I should have known. I should have trusted you instead of believing her stories about your memory problems. The following Monday, Marcus Webb called with updates that demonstrated just how far-reaching the consequences of our investigation had become. Silvia, you need to see the morning news. This story has gone national. I turned on my television to see Agent Chen giving a press conference about Operation Golden Years. Behind her was a display board showing photographs of all the arrested suspects, including a particularly unflattering mugshot of Brenda, looking haggard and desperate in her orange jail jumpsuit. This investigation demonstrates the sophisticated methods criminals use to exploit elderly Americans. Agent Chen was telling reporters. They don't just steal money. They systematically destroy their victims' relationships with family members, isolate them from support systems, and strip away their dignity and independence. The news coverage sparked a national conversation about elder abuse that resulted in hundreds of tips from families who suspected similar crimes. By Thursday, the FBI had opened investigations in 12 additional states based on reports from viewers who recognized the patterns Agent Chen described. The most important lesson from this case, Agent Chen concluded, is that elderly Americans are not helpless victims. Mrs. Anderson fought back intelligently and courageously, not only protecting herself, but helping us save dozens of other families from similar victimization. That afternoon brought the most satisfying news of all. Margaret called from the bank to report that federal prosecutors had frozen all of Brenda's assets and were beginning the process of recovering money stolen from victims across the network. We've traced the missing funds through multiple accounts across 3 states, Margaret explained. Between criminal restitution and civil asset forfeiture, you'll recover approximately 97% of what was stolen from you. The other victims in the network will also receive substantial recovery of their losses. But the financial recovery was only part of the story. Dr. Polk's medical license fraud had been reported to licensing boards in all 50 states, preventing him from establishing new fraudulent practices elsewhere. The nursing homes that had accepted patients based on his fraudulent evaluations were facing federal investigation and potential closure. Kyle's arrest had led police to Vincent Torino's loan shark operation, which had been preying on families involved in elder fraud schemes. When those families were arrested, Torino lost his network of borrowers and his criminal enterprise collapsed. It's like watching dominoes fall. Marcus observed when he visited me at the beach house, which was finally being restored after weeks of damage from Brenda's occupation. Each arrest leads to new evidence that brings down more criminals. The restoration of my home was proceeding slowly but successfully. Professional cleaners had removed the drug contamination from my kitchen and study. Craftsmen were repairing the damage to my floors and furniture. Insurance adjusters were documenting everything for the civil lawsuits that would follow the criminal prosecutions. But some losses couldn't be repaired. My grandmother's china had been broken during drug-fueled parties. Family photographs had been destroyed or sold online. Personal mementos from my marriage to Robert had been carelessly discarded or damaged beyond recovery. The physical items can be replaced, I told Marcus as we walked through my restored living room. What can't be replaced is the time I lost grieving for relationships that were deliberately destroyed by criminals. The psychological impact of Brenda's betrayal extended far beyond financial crimes. She had systematically poisoned my relationship with my son, making him believe his mother was losing her mind. She had isolated me from my support systems and made me question my own memories and perceptions. That's the cruelest part of elder abuse, Marcus explained. It's not just about stealing money, it's about erasing the victim's identity and making them feel powerless to fight back. But I had fought back, and the results were transforming how law enforcement approached elder abuse cases throughout the country. Agent Chen had invited me to speak at a national conference about financial crimes, where my story would help train investigators to recognize similar schemes. "You've become a symbol of resistance," Agent Chen told me during our final interview. "Elderly Americans who hear your story understand that they don't have to be helpless victims. They can fight back intelligently and win." As I prepared for Brenda's sentencing hearing, I reflected on how completely my life had changed in just 2 months. The confused, helpless widow that Brenda had tried to create was gone forever, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and absolutely committed to protecting other elderly Americans from similar victimization. The woman who had been called an old leech was about to watch her tormentor face the consequences of underestimating the strength, intelligence, and determination of someone who had lived through 68 years of challenges and wasn't about to surrender without a fight. 6 months after Brenda's arrest, I stood in the federal courthouse in downtown Los Angeles, waiting to address the court before her sentencing. She sat at the defendant's table in shackles, having pled guilty to 8 federal charges, including wire fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, and conspiracy. Her once perfect appearance had deteriorated during her time in federal custody, and she looked every bit like the criminal she had always been beneath her carefully constructed facade. Judge Morrison, the same judge who had presided over the failed competency hearing, reviewed the extensive victim impact statements that had been submitted by the 47 elderly Americans whose lives Brenda's criminal network had destroyed. "Mrs. Anderson," Judge Morrison addressed me, "would you like to make a statement before I impose sentence?" I approached the podium looking directly at Brenda, whose eyes were fixed on the table in front of her. She couldn't meet my gaze, couldn't face the woman she had underestimated so catastrophically. "Your Honor, 6 months ago, this woman called me an old leech and told me there was no room for me in my own home. She thought she was dealing with a confused, helpless widow who would quietly disappear into whatever nursing home she selected for me." My voice was strong and clear, carrying the weight of experience and absolute moral authority. She didn't understand that insulting someone who has survived 68 years of life's challenges, raised a family, built a successful marriage, and overcome countless obstacles is a very dangerous mistake. She saw my age and assumed weakness. She witnessed my grief and mistook it for incompetence. She observed my loneliness and concluded I was defenseless. I turned slightly to address Brenda directly. "You were wrong about everything. I wasn't weak, incompetent, or defenseless. I was angry, intelligent, and absolutely determined to stop you from destroying other families the way you tried to destroy mine." Brenda finally looked up, and I saw in her eyes the fear of someone who understood too late that her victim had become her nemesis. Judge Morrison imposed a sentence of 7 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation and restitution to all victims. Kyle received 5 years for his role in the conspiracy. Dr. Polk, whose fraudulent medical practice had enabled the entire scheme, was sentenced to 15 years and ordered to pay damages to every family he had helped defraud. This case represents one of the most sophisticated elder abuse schemes ever prosecuted in federal court, Judge Morrison announced. The defendants systematically targeted elderly Americans not just for their money, but to destroy their dignity, independence, and family relationships. Mrs. Anderson's courage in fighting back has protected countless other families from similar victimization. As we left the courthouse, Agent Chen walked with me toward the street where Marcus was waiting to drive me home. Silvia, I wanted you to know that your case has changed how we investigate elder abuse throughout the country. We've established task forces in 26 states specifically to identify and dismantle operations like Brenda's network. The success of our investigation had led to congressional hearings about elder abuse protection, resulting in new federal legislation that strengthened penalties for financial crimes against elderly Americans. Banks were now required to implement additional safeguards for accounts belonging to seniors, and medical licensing boards had enhanced verification systems to prevent fraudulent practitioners like Dr. Polk. How many families have been protected because of what we accomplished? I asked. Based on our investigations, we estimate that stopping this network prevented at least 200 additional families from being victimized over the next 5 years. Your decision to fight back saved millions of dollars and protected countless elderly Americans from having their lives destroyed. That evening, I stood on the deck of my restored beach house watching the sunset paint the Pacific Ocean in brilliant shades of orange and gold. The same deck where Robert and I had planned our retirement, where we'd dreamed of spending our golden years in peace and security. The house was beautiful again, restored to the sanctuary Robert and I had created together. But more importantly, it had become something we never intended: the headquarters of the Silver Shield Foundation, a nonprofit organization I'd established to help elderly Americans protect themselves from financial abuse. Margaret had left her position at the bank to become the foundation's executive director. Marcus served as our chief investigator, working with law enforcement agencies across the country to identify and expose elder abuse schemes. We'd helped 12 families recover stolen assets and had trained hundreds of seniors to recognize the warning signs of financial exploitation. "You've turned your trauma into a force for good," Margaret observed as we reviewed the foundation's quarterly report. "Every day we prevent other families from experiencing what Brenda tried to do to you." My son Danny had undergone months of counseling to overcome the guilt of being manipulated into betraying his mother. Our relationship was stronger now than it had ever been, built on honest communication and mutual respect, rather than the false assumptions that had made us vulnerable to Brenda's manipulation. I learned that love without vigilance isn't enough to protect family. Danny told me during one of our weekly dinners. I should have investigated Brenda's claims instead of just accepting them, because I wanted to believe I was helping you. His children, my grandchildren, were regular visitors to the beach house now. They'd never known the extent of Brenda's crimes. They understood that their grandmother was someone who fought for justice and protected people who couldn't protect themselves. The foundation's work had expanded beyond individual cases to include legislative advocacy and public education. I testified before Congress about the need for stronger elder abuse prevention, and our recommendations became part of federal legislation that strengthened protections for elderly Americans. The most important lesson I learned, I told the Congressional Committee, is that age is not weakness, grief is not incompetence, and loneliness is not defenselessness. Criminals who target elderly Americans assume we're easy victims. They're wrong, and we need to show them exactly how wrong they are. The national media coverage of my story had inspired other elderly Americans to report suspicious activities by family members and caregivers. FBI field offices across the country had received thousands of tips that led to investigations of similar schemes. You've become a symbol of resistance for elderly Americans everywhere, Agent Chen told me during her visit to the Foundation's office. When seniors see that a 70-year-old widow can take down an organized criminal enterprise, they understand they're not powerless against people who try to exploit them. As I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on the journey from being a grieving widow to becoming an advocate for elderly Americans everywhere. Brenda had tried to steal more than my money. She'd attempted to erase my identity, destroy my independence, and reduce me to a helpless victim dependent on the mercy of people who had no mercy. Instead, her attack had awakened something in me that I didn't know existed, the fierce determination of someone who refuses to be defeated by criminals who mistake kindness for weakness and age for vulnerability. The Silver Shield Foundation had received a letter that morning from Dorothy Williams, an 80-year-old woman in Phoenix whose daughter had been attempting to gain control of her assets through fraudulent incompetency claims. Dorothy had heard my story on the news and contacted us for help. Working with local law enforcement, we'd exposed her daughter's scheme and helped Dorothy maintain her independence. "Your courage gave me courage," Dorothy wrote. "I realized I didn't have to accept what my daughter was doing to me. I could fight back and win." These letters arrived weekly from elderly Americans across the country who'd been inspired to resist exploitation by family members, caregivers, and criminal organizations that targeted them for their assets and vulnerability. My beach house, which had briefly been a crime scene, was now a beacon of hope for elderly Americans who refused to be victimized. The deck where I'd grieved for Robert had become a place where I planned strategies to protect other widows from predators who saw grief as opportunity. As I locked the front door that Brenda had once blocked with her body, I smiled at the memory of her words. Why did that old leech show up here? No room for you. There was room for me everywhere now, in courtrooms where I testified against elder abuse, in congressional hearing rooms, where I advocated for stronger protections, in FBI training centers, where I taught agents to recognize sophisticated exploitation schemes, and in my own home, which had been restored as a sanctuary where elderly Americans could find the support and resources they needed to fight back against those who would prey upon them. The woman who had been dismissed as an old leech had become someone much more dangerous to criminals everywhere, an elderly American who knew her worth, understood her rights, and was absolutely committed to protecting others from the predators who mistake age for weakness. Have you or someone you love ever experienced elder abuse or financial exploitation by family members? These crimes are more common than most people realize, and victims often suffer in silence because they're ashamed or don't know where to turn for help. If this story resonated with you, please share it with others who might need to hear that it's never too late to fight back against those who try to steal your independence and dignity. I'd love to hear your thoughts about how we can better protect elderly Americans from financial abuse. Have you witnessed warning signs that a senior in your life might be experiencing exploitation? What resources do you think would be most helpful for elderly people who need to resist criminal schemes targeting their assets? Please like this video if Silvia's story inspired you. Subscribe to stay updated on more stories of ordinary people fighting back against injustice, and share this with anyone who needs to understand that age brings wisdom and strength, not weakness and vulnerability. Together we can create a world where criminals think twice before targeting elderly Americans, who are much stronger, smarter, and more determined than they appear. Thank you for listening to this story of transformation justice and the power that comes from refusing to accept victimization. Remember, no matter what challenges you face or how powerless others try to make you feel, you always have the strength to fight back and the right to claim the respect and dignity you deserve.